All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting episode of Discovering the New Dragons. Join me as we discover what may be your new favorite RPG. So first things first, I know you guys are expecting me to do the crossover Essence 20 stuff. Gonna be blunt with you guys. I've done nothing but Essence 20 for like 7 months. I have reviewed, I think the last, I think 7 in-depth reviews I've done have been exclusively Essence 20 stuff. I love the system, don't get me wrong, but I'm 100% burnt out. I've been trying to create the videos for it, and I just don't have any creative juices left for that. And something big is coming up pretty soon here, so gonna do a slight shift of focus. If you've read the title of this video, you know what's happening. Today on Discovering New Dragons, we are going to be talking about a relatively new RPG. It was actually published in English last year. And at this past Gen Con actually won 2 ENnie Awards. If you're not familiar with the ENnies, the ENnie Awards are awards that are given out for board games in general. And they won the silver, I believe it was silver for RPG product of the year, and the gold for, or silver. They won a silver and a gold, which is a really big deal. And one of the reasons that I am covering Fabula Ultima is for Daily December, which is now less than a month away. Last year, I did a Power Rangers campaign. This year, I'm going to be doing a Fabula Ultima campaign. So, I figured I would give everyone here a little bit of preview of what exactly Fabula Ultima is. We'll build some characters, and then by the time we have our session 0, for the last Wednesday in November, we should have some pretty cool stuff. So, that being said, I think it's time for us to delve into the next section. And I just realized I don't have my drink, so boom, need some water. Moving on. So, first things first, let's talk about the history. There is a brilliant post in r/RPG. The post, I'm going to quote it specifically, so I'm going to say the person that wrote it. Their username is the Games Thief. And their description of Fabula Ultima is such a brilliant description of what this game actually is as far as where it came from. Fabula Ultima is an Italian RPG based on an English translation of Ryutama, a Japanese game based on American tabletop RPGs. It's also a TTRPG trying to emulate JRPGs. And that literally is what Fabula Ultima is. It pitches itself as a TTJRPG because it's meant to emulate things like Final Fantasy or Chrono Trigger or Breath of Fire or a million other old school JRPGs that you might have played on the Super Nintendo or the first PlayStation, stuff like that. Really good stuff. As far as where this game came from, again, it is an Italian game. All the books came out in Italian before they were translated into English. My understanding is the English version came out last year in 2022. I believe it was in October of 2022. Brand, this is a spanking new game, but it was actually based on another RPG that was a Japanese tabletop RPG called, and I may be pronouncing this incorrectly, but I think it's Ryutama. And that's how I'm going to pronounce it going forward. If I'm completely butchering this, feel free to tell me what a moron I am in the comments down below. So Ryutama From the Wikipedia, Ryutama is a Japanese role-playing game about traveling and friendship by Atsuhiro Okada. And it's influenced by the animations of... thank you, phone. It's influenced by the animations of Hayao Miyazaki. If you don't know that name, you may recognize the things that he's done. Things like Kiki's Delivery Service, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle. He actually has a new movie that's coming out relatively soon here that looks amazing, called The Boy in the Blue Heron, I believe. It looks phenomenal. Very much kind of a return to form for Miyazaki. He's a brilliant, brilliant Japanese animator, and the movies that he makes become legends, and they're loved the world over. So you have this RPG, Ryutama, that just has this really kind of cozy feel that is kind of built into the world of Miyazaki. And this Italian author who has a Patreon that for the love of me I can't remember. It might just be like the Patreon itself is just Fabula Ultima. But anyway, he has a Patreon, and he decides that he wants to create an RPG that will let him create stories that feel more like Final Fantasy games and less like Tolkien books. D&D, the kind of genesis of RPGs in general, was basically created by a bunch of tabletop war gamers that went, hey, you know, it'd be really fun. What if instead of recreating, World War II battles or something like that, which is, or, earlier battles like, the 100 Years War, the War of the Roses and things like that. Instead of doing stuff like that, what if we made a game that would let us recreate stuff like the Battle of Helm's Deep? Like, wouldn't that be cool? And they were both really big Tolkien fans. And so that's how D&D started. And D&D was always meant to kind of emulate that high fantasy Tolkien-esque storytelling. And when you start seeing like the early Final Fantasy games, there was that kind of influence. Again, all RPGs can kind of trace themselves back in one way, shape, or form to D&D, because a lot of the ideas of like XP and levels and character classes, all of that kind of originated with D&D. But Final Fantasy never quite felt like you were taking a page out of The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or something like that. It had its own feel. And then as the series progressed, it started doing some very different things that became beloved. I still, to this day, can remember, it's one of my earliest memories, watching my dad play Final Fantasy IV on our Super Nintendo. And I remember this scene where Cecil wakes up after something happens. He gets knocked in the water. He wakes up on the shore, and you hear the Overland theme of Final Fantasy IV start playing. And that song has been stuck in my head for like 30 years. It's incredible. And so this wonderful person, I can't remember his name, and I feel really, really bad. I totally plan all these things out, I swear to you guys. There we go. Emmanuel Galetto. If I'm mispronouncing your name, I sincerely apologize. You make amazing things. But anyway, Galetto wants to be able to kind of recreate that feeling, because D&D, especially modern D&D, does not feel like Final Fantasy at all. If you guys have been watching this channel for years now, you guys know that I actually did an entire series of D&D Deep Dive where we looked at this Final Fantasy XIV cross D&D supplement that some really amazing, wonderful people made. And translating Final Fantasy XIV to Dungeons and Dragons was not easy. And you guys saw as I went through all the different things and I made suggestions just how difficult it was, because D&D is just not meant to tell stories like that. D&D is a very different system, and it's a phenomenal system. Don't get me wrong. This is not me saying 5th edition or Dungeons and Dragons itself is bad. It's not. I still think it's one of the best design systems on the market, and it is the number one RPG, and has always been the number one RPG as long as it's been printing the things. So, yeah. Galetto just had this kind of idea of like, well, what if we could do something like that? And he created this really brilliant system that adheres to the idea of tabletop RPGs, old school JRPGs. I mean, so well. It's scary, to be perfectly honest. And so, again, he has a Patreon. I don't think he ever did the like crowdfunding or anything like that, but I believe this has all been funded through his Patreon and just his own tenacity. And so he creates his game. And again, compared to something like D&D that has, 30, 40 years of history, Fabula Ultima, the English version has existed for just over a year. And the Italian version, I think, is maybe a year older than that, tops. The translations for English come out remarkably quickly, like within months of the Italian stuff coming out. So, yeah, it's a relatively short history, but in that short history, it has been making waves. Yeah. Moving on. The next section, the lore. When I do these Discovering New Dragons episodes, I like to give people an idea of the kind of default setting that all of the classes and everything are kind of going to be based on. For D&D right now, that's the Forgotten Realms. If you're doing Pathfinder, Pathfinder has their own, there aren't multiple campaign settings for Pathfinder. Pathfinder is Pathfinder is Pathfinder. If you look at like Vampire the Masquerade, that's its own setting. All those other things, they have their own setting. The Cypher system is generic, but it came from Numenera, which is in its own setting. And the setting a lot of times will explain where the mechanics come. As far as lore for Fabula Ultima, there technically isn't any. And the reason being, it's one of the unique things about running a Fabula Ultima game is part of building your characters is creating the world that you're going to play in. And one of the really, really unique things, I have the digital version. I got them through DriveThruRPG, which I'll have a link to the DriveThru stuff. Or actually, I'll just have a link to Fabula Ultima's website, so you can get all the stuff there too. But I got the digital stuff, and it comes with a bunch of digital sheets that you can use, form fillable sheets. They're really great. One of the sheets is what's called the World Sheet. And what it is part of your Session 0, which Fabula Ultima really almost requires a Session 0. I've mentioned this before. I do not think Session 0s are absolutely necessary for every single game. And I think we've kind of fetishized them to the point where people raise Session 0s to this thing of, well, if you have a Session 0 and it's done well, then nothing can go wrong in your game, and everything can be fixed by a solid Session 0. It's not true. It never has been true, and Session 0s have existed for probably as long as D&D has existed. However, they are a useful tool to have. They're just not nearly as important as people put them out to be for most games. For this game, part of the game is you actually build the world. And in the book, it'll actually have you tell your players, okay, they have 2 blank world maps that they give you. They go, hey, you can use either one of these, or you can make your own map. What you do is you put the map in front of the players, and then each player gets to invent a city. And then you go around again, and each player gets to invent a faction that exists somewhere in that world. And then after everybody has kind of introduced their aspects to the world, the DM fills the rest of it out. And it's a really interesting thing. So as far as lore for Fabula Ultima, there isn't any by design. And it's going and you are going to write the lore as you create your characters. And it's actually an important part of character creation. We'll talk about character creation in a little bit. That your characters should be an intrinsic part of the world. Just like every Final Fantasy, if you look at Final Fantasy 1, the grandfather of Final Fantasies, your characters are the warriors of light. They were prophesied to come, and when they show up, they all come with their own crystal, and all the crystals are dark, and they have to go around awakening each one of their crystals so that they can save the world. They're intrinsically attached to the world. When you move up to Final Fantasy II, there's an empire and a resistance, and each of the player characters are related to each other for the most part. If I remember correctly, I think 3 of them are related to each other. They all come from the same town that the Empire just wiped off the face of the map. You go to Final Fantasy III, and it's a bunch of orphans that actually come from the Dark World, because everybody lives on a floating island. In Final Fantasy IV, Cecil is the leader of the Red Wings, which is a huge military power from the city-state of Baron. And it goes on and on and on. The characters are always intrinsically linked to the world that they exist in. You'll see this in every single Final Fantasy. You know, Final Fantasy VII, half of the party is from Midgard, and Shinra's trying to take over the world. Final Fantasy VIII, they're all from Balam Garden. And all, spoiler alert, and all lived together when they were kids. And so that aspect translated really well, and it means that the lore is going to be as complex or as simplistic as you want. Now, one thing that is kind of cool, there are supplements that are coming out for Fabula Ultima. The first one, called the High Fantasy Atlas, has already come out, and it's brilliant. And in it, it doesn't give you a campaign setting to play in. Doesn't give you a pre-made world. Somebody on the DM's Guild page was really upset about that there was no map included with it. Apparently they hadn't read the original Fabula Ultima. But what it does do is it describes certain things that most RPGs or JRPGs tend to have. Like, this is the mystical forest, and gives you kind of a description of a mystical forest that you could use in your world. This is the City of the Ancients, and it gives you a description of a city of the Ancients that you could put in your world. You don't have to. You can use as little or as much of it as you want, but it's a brilliant way to make that initial lore planning session a little bit easier. You can go, oh, cool, well, I want a magic forest, and I want, the City of the Ancients, and I'm actually going to bring up the Atlas of High Fantasy. There we go. Just because I want... So, yeah, they have Yggdrasil, the World Tree, and Verge, Land of Cataclysm, and Seraphim, the Realm in the Sky. And so it's just a bunch of generic places and cities and things like that you can use to build your own high fantasy world. The next one is going to be a tech fantasy style thing, and then the third one is going to be a nature fantasy. The tech one, I believe the tech one may already be out or is coming out very soon in Italian, and then we'll probably have to wait a few months before we get it in English. But so yeah, so again, that's one of the coolest things about Fabula Ultima, is the fact that the lore is entirely defined by you, which seems a little bit overwhelming, especially for a new DM. But the way that the game is designed is as the game master, you are not going to be designing the world on your own. The players are going to have as much a say in designing the world as you have. And I think it's wonderful. So, yeah. Moving on. Let's talk about dice rolls and mechanics. So, something, especially for someone like me, who has played a lot of different RPGs, has read even more. One of the first things I'm going to do when I pick up a new book is I'm going to go to the game rules section, and I'm going to see, okay, how does this work? Is this a standard D20 game? Does this use dice pools? What am I going to be doing when I'm at the table? And the dice rolling for Fabula Ultima is really interesting because you are only ever rolling 2 dice and you only have 4 attributes. And I got to look. Where are conflict series not even a character. I think that's what I want. There we go. So, the only thing that you're ever really going to doing is you have 4 attributes. You have dexterity, you have insight, you have might, and you have willpower. And during character creation, you are going to assign dice to them. The dice can be anywhere from a D6 to eventually you can get a D12. But at character creation, I believe the highest you can have is a D10 in any thing. And so what happens is anytime you make a roll, they will pair up 2 of those 4 things. So you might have a dexterity might check. And so what that means is you take your die for dexterity, and you take your die for might, and you roll them. And then you see if you can roll higher than the difficulty class. So obviously, the larger your die, the better chance you're going to have to roll bigger numbers. Critical hits, the other big thing that all RPG players need to know about. Critical hits happen when you roll doubles that are at least a 6. So if you roll double 6s, double 7s, double 8s, double 9s, double 10s, double 11s, or double 12s. And again, to have a D12 on this is something, you can't actually have that at character creation. You actually have to go really high to do that. So the likelihood of you ever rolling double 12s is relatively low. But basically what happens when you roll a critical hit, which a critical success is what they call it. You automatically succeed, and you get what's called an opportunity, which is basically just something extra that you get to do. So you might, and they have a list of opportunities that you can pick from, or you can just say, well, I'd like this nice thing to happen, and do it that way. Works very similar to how the Cypher system works, where if you roll a 19 or a 20, you either get a minor boon or a major boon. Same kind of basic principle. Something very nice happens because of that. And some of the examples they have is like the next check performed by you or an ally will receive a +4 bonus, or your actions earn you someone's support or admiration. Things like that. If both dice roll during a check show a 1, that's considered a fumble. If you get a fumble, the whoever controls the opposition gets an opportunity, but you get another aspect of Fabula Ultima in the idea that you get what's called a Fabula point. Fabula points are kind of the other thing that are used. Very similar to if you've played Open Legend, legend points into the things like that, where they're basically something extra that you can use to reroll dice. Sometimes there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. One of the ways you can do it is using it to reroll dice by invoking a trait or a bond, or invoking a trait or an origin. You can use it to invoke a bond and just add a flat number to your scores. And there's a few abilities in the game that require you to burn Fabula points. And so that's kind of the other thing that you're going to be dealing with, is you do have your dice pool. And the cool thing about the attributes is, I mentioned before, you might make a dexterity might check to hit something with like a sword, because it requires a little bit of accuracy, but it also requires a little strength. But you also might just make a dexterity check, because you're doing something that really only requires dexterity. Or you might make an insight willpower check because it requires you to use your reasoning, but it also requires you to kind of use your internal drive, your charisma as well. Or you might make an insight might check or a dexterity willpower check, or you can mix and match them however you want depending on the situation, which is really, really cool. And then you also, when we go through character creation in just a second here, we'll also talk about origins and themes and bonds and the things like that, because those are all things that you can do to invoke your Fabula points. The other thing that gets you Fabula points is when a villain shows up. Now, this again feels very, very Final Fantasy. When a villain shows up in the game and you are aware they are a villain, every character gets a Fabula point. And they specifically have little side scenes that they encourage GMs to do if their players are getting low on Fabula points. They say, okay, we'll have a side scene where none of the players are in there and it's just them observing something that happens, which is extremely common in Final Fantasy games. How many times in Final Fantasy VI does it code over to whatever in the hell Kefka's doing at that particular moment in his own insanity? This is an extremely common thing that happens in Final Fantasy games and GRPs in general, because it creates dramatic tension. If you're not familiar with that term, dramatic tension is a theater term, and it's basically when the audience knows something that the characters themselves don't. And it's utilized in, I think, just about every storytelling method ever. Like, you can get it in books, you can get it in stage, film, television shows, whatever. The audience is always going to know more than the characters themselves, because they're watching things happen as opposed to experiencing them. Most RPGs will outright almost forbid you from running GM-only scenes. You know, this is about the players. You should allow the players to play their characters. And everyone is always terrified about the dreaded metagaming. If you tell the players something that the characters don't know, well, then the players are going to be completely incapable of not using that knowledge. Fabula Ultima doesn't care about that. And so there will be scenes where the players just get to kind of look at what the villain is doing at that point, and those scenes give Fabula points. It's a really interesting system. And then the final mechanic that I think is really, really cool, and I'm going to take a drink. The final mechanic that I think is really, really cool in this is what are called clocks. Not like ba-da-da-ba-da-da-ba-da, and, you know, a dude that has a conscious uncoupling. If you have no idea what I'm referencing there, congratulations. Clocks are something that I 100% have already stolen from Fabula Ultima and will be using in every RPG I've ever run, ever. What clocks are is basically when something big happens that can't be resolved with a single check, the GM will put a clock in front of the players. And that clock can have anywhere from 4 sections all the way up to 12 sections. And so how a clock works is something happens, the GM will put a clock up and go, okay, you guys are trying to sneak into this building. Well, there's guards and security in it, and so this is our security clock. every time you guys fail a check or something, it will fill the clock. And once the clock is completely full, everybody in the building is aware of your presence. Now, aspects like this have existed, again, for decades in RPGs. D&D 4th edition actually had a system called skills challenges that actually used a very similar aspect where what it was you would have something that you need to do, and you need to get so many successes before so many failures. Generally, it would be twice as many successes as failures. So if you needed 6 successes, you needed to get that before you had 3 failures. And so this is not a new system in any way, shape, or form, but the fact that it is intended to be used in this particular way, and the point of it is you are supposed to put the clock in front of the players so that everybody at the table can see not only the clock, they can see how full it is. And clocks can be positive or negative. Again, you can have the clock where, the more things that are filled in, the more of a chance that everybody's going to be alerted to your presence. You can have a clock filling in that as it fills in, the cavern that you're in is starting to crumble. If you're not out of there before it fills up, your characters are all going to get crushed. But you can also have clocks of, okay, you're all trying to perform this group magic check to summon a powerful being to help you out here. And so each success gets that filled up a little bit bigger. Or maybe you're trying to convince a shopkeeper to give you guys a discount on their goods. And it's not just a simple thing. You're trying to get like a repeat customer kind of punch card thing, and so it's kind of complex. The entire party is helping, and so you have a little clock to see how close you are to actually getting that. Or maybe it's something bigger. Maybe you guys have sat down at a table with a bunch of different countries that are considering going to war, and now you have to see how many of those groups are actually going to help you. So with each group that agrees to help you, you start filling in your clock. Maybe you have 2 different clocks there. You have one clock that these are all the allies we're going to get, and you're going to have one clock that these are all the people we've pissed off and are never going to help us ever, and whichever one gets filled first changes how the story goes. There are so many different ways you can use clocks. And again, I think the best part about clocks is the fact that they're put in front of the players and they're filled in as the players react and as the players play. So they can all see exactly what effect their actions are having on the game in a physical form. A lot of times, if you're doing something more esoteric, it can be kind of difficult for the players to understand, what effect are we having on this world? So clocks just give a really, really simple to understand idea of, what are we going to do next? So yeah, so that's the basics of like dice rolls and mechanics. Is you have your 4 attributes. Anytime that you're making a roll, it's going to be a combination of 2 attributes, and you can just combine the same 2 attributes. Basically what that means is you have a die in each attribute, and you pick that die for the roll, and then there are a few static modifiers that will be added to it. So it might be, Dex and Might +2 or something like that. And those are your rolls. And yeah, like I said, really cool, really simple to understand as a system. Yeah, moving on. Let's talk about character creation. Character creation in and of itself is another thing that Fabula Ultima does something that I've never seen in an RPG. And one of the things that kind of upsets me about Fabula Ultima is the idea that there is a game that I really, really love that for the life of me, my brain is so fried at this point, guys. I'm trying to remember what's it's called. Anyway, there's a Diablo clone out there that the way that you play it, I guess the way that you play it is basically at level 1 you pick a class, and then you get to pick another class at level, I think it's 10 or something like that. And so basically every character is a combination of 2 different classes. And it's a really cool game that I really, really like, but I've never seen a tabletop RPG do that. Because while you do have multi-classing, you don't actually have like 2 classes getting shoved together to create a brand new hybrid class. 4th edition kind of did that. They did have what was called hybrid classes, where effectively every time you leveled up, you could choose to take abilities from either class, and it was a really cool thing, and I loved playing around with hybrid classes in 4th edition. But that was still kind of a hodgepodge of rules, and it didn't always work super well. Well, what happens in Fabula Ultima is, first things first, you start off at level 5. It's level 5. Why can't I start at level 1? Well, because the way that you build your character is in the core rulebook. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay. There are 14 different classes in Fabula Ultima, the core book. Each new kind of supplement adds a few more. But the way that you build your character is you start off by choosing either 2 or 3 classes. And basically what the classes are is the classes are a collection of skills. So, for example, the Dark Blade. The Dark Blade has 1, 2, 3, 4. Dark Blade has 5 different skills, and a few of them you can take multiple levels in. So if I was building a character, I could take 2 levels of Darkblade, and then that would mean I could take 2 of the 5 skills here. There's no real limitation other than, if you want a higher level in a skill, you have to, again, Agony, you can get up to 5 levels, and basically each level just increases the amount of hit points and mind points you recover when you use that particular skill. So basically what happens in character creation is you choose either 2 or 3 classes and split your 5 levels between those 2 or 3 classes to create your own unique character. And what happens is you just take 5 skills from 2 or 3 different classes. So I might take Agony, which basically lets, when you damage a creature that you have a bond toward, you get to basically drain some of their hit points and mind points. Or Shadow Strike, which basically lets you sacrifice a little of your hit points to do some extra damage. So if I wanted to create, let's say, a cursed gunslinger, let's say, I might take Shadow Strike from the Dark Blade, but then I also might take Barrage from the Sharpshooter, which allows me to just fire at multiple targets. Or maybe I'll take Ranged Weapon Mastery, which just means it's easier for me to hit with ranged attacks. And then to round things out, I'm going to take Cheap Shot from the Rogue. And that's the character I've created. And so because of that, again, 14 different classes that you can have up to 3 combined to create your own character. The customization options are crazy. And none of the classes have that many skills. Like, most of them only have 4 or 5 skills, and like 3 or 4 of those skills will have multiple levels that you can take. So it's not like this is a 4,000 page book and you have to read through all of it. No, the entirety of all of the classes and all of their skills starts on page 176 and ends on page 219. So we're talking like 50-ish pages? Not that much for just the sheer amount of customization and crazy stuff that you can make with this. So in addition to your classes, character creation doesn't even start with picking your classes. You actually start by creating an identity. An identity is just kind of a title. You know, it's a description. It's a one-sentence description of your character. And the reason that the identity is important is you can use your identity, you can invoke your identity to use a Fabula point to reroll one or both dice that you've just rolled. So an example of an identity might be Captain of the Crimson Reapers or Knight of the White Flame. It's not meant to be something like, oh, I'm a really cool dude that likes long watching me. No, it's supposed to be things like Battle Priestess of the Old Faith, or Former Imperial Strategist, or Magitech Scientist, or One-Eyed Samurai. Just something that gives you an idea of some motivation of your character and kind of their place, how they see themselves in the world. And if you're doing something and you realize that, like, if your identity is Warrior Princess of the Moon People, and you're in a fight where the villain has come with an airship armada and they're trying to wipe out the Moon People, and you make a roll and whoa, is it bad? You can go, well, I'm a Warrior Princess of the Moon People. My people are in danger, and because of that, I'm going to try extra hard in this, and and you come up with some narrative explanation, and then you re-roll and see if you do better. So yeah, you start with your identity, which they do have a bunch of tables you can roll on if you can't think of something off the top of your head. And then you also choose a theme. Your theme is going to be a one-word ideal or purpose for your character. They have suggested themes. You don't have to use them, but things like ambition, justice, duty, vengeance, mercy. Your identity and your theme can actually change as you're playing. Very similar to how Final Fantasy games go. To bring up Final Fantasy IV again, because it's a brilliant game, Cecil starts out where their identity would be Captain of the Red Knights. I can't remember. Wow. I just completely blanked on what their Air Force is. But they were the captain of the... my brain is just gone. Red Wings. There we go. Captain of the Red Wings. And their theme might be duty. Because they actually talk about in the very intro of the game, shortly after going to Miss City and coming back with the crystal, Kane and Cecil are talking, and he mentions, I became a Dark Knight at the request of the king. And so duty was a massive, massive part of his life. However, partway through the game, spoiler alert, he has a change of heart because his king is asking him to do horrible things and kill innocents and things like that. And so he has a change of heart. And he actually changes classes too. He turns into a paladin. And so his identity would go from Captain of the Red Wings to Redeemed Paladin, we could call it. And then his theme might change from duty to justice. You know, he wants to take that out. Or you might even, you might go from duty to guilt. He wants to atone for what he did as a Dark Knight. So many different things. And again, it fits so well in the idea of a Final Fantasy style game. This is incredibly common in Japanese RPGs in general. These ideas that characters see themselves one way, and then as they go through the story, they may learn things about themselves that change how they view themselves. And I mean, it's built into character creation. It's super cool. And then after you choose all those, you choose your 2 or 3 starting classes. Each one of them, each class comes with what are called free benefits, which will basically be things like you'll increase your hit points or increase your mind points, which is your magic points effectively. Some of them even increase inventory points. We'll talk about that in a second. And some of them will even give you access to different weapons and armor. So you have like basic weapons and then martial weapons and armor. And if you don't have a class that lets you use them, you just can't use those particular things. And then, again, once you pick the 2 or 3 classes that you will want, you can take any skills from them that you want and create your own custom character. One of the things I really like about the core book is they have an entire section that's just called classic characters. So if you wanted to play, let's say, a gunslinger, they tell you to they actually tell you where to put your dice. So in this one, for a gunslinger, you do a D10 for your dexterity, insight is a D8, might is a D8, willpower is a D6, and then you have 3 levels of sharpshooter, 2 levels in tinkerer, and they tell you which specific skills to choose. So for the gunslinger, for your 3 sharpshooter levels, you take barrage, crossfire, and ranged weapon mastery. And then for tinkerer, you take inventions, you take it to level 2, and you get a bunch of infusions that you get to do. Tinkerers are basically artificers. Or if you wanted to be a ninja, 3 levels of rogue, 1 level of spiritist, and 1 level of weapon master. If you wanted to be a monster mage, which those of us that are familiar with Final Fantasy might call that a blue mage, you could take 3 levels of chimerist, 1 level of wayfarer, and 1 level of weapon master. If you wanted to be a black knight, or as all of us that have played Final Fantasy or a million other games, they might call it a dark knight or a death knight. You take Darkblade 2 levels, Entropist 1 level, and Weapon Master 2 levels. You see how this goes? And they have, 1, 2, 3, 4. They have 4 pages of these example classes. And they even tell you what starting equipment you should go with. So it's really cool. And then it gets into the character classes themselves. And the classes are really interesting. Like the Arcanist. An Arcanist is effectively a summoner. But the way that they work is when you take one of their skills, called Bind and Summon, it allows you to attune to what's called an Arcana. And Arcanas are basically summon creatures. They are these kind of demi-deity-like things. If you're familiar with Final Fantasy, they take the role of summons very well. And the way that the Arcanist works is you can summon the Arcana as an action, and as soon as you merge with it, you get something benefit. Like the Arcanum of the Forge is one of the examples they have here. When you merge with it, you have resistance to fire damage, and any fire damage you deal ignores resistance. So you basically summon this thing, and now fire doesn't hurt you as much, and if you use fire in any of your attacks whatsoever, people can't be resistant to it. Your particular fire is so hot it burns through resistance. But then they also have dismiss effects. So for the Arcanum of the Forge, it has 2 different dismiss effects. Basically, if you invoke it, if you summon it, and then voluntarily dismiss it, you do it on purpose, you can choose what happens when they go away. So one of them, Forge for Arcanum of the Forge, you can create a basic armor, shield, or weapon of your choice, and it deals fire damage instead of physical damage. So you literally can summon it, and then when you dismiss it, it leaves you a fire sword. Or you can choose the Inferno option, which is choose any number of creatures you can see. Each of them suffers 30 fire damage. This damage ignores resistance. So you can take the more classic approach to summon spells that you see in Final Fantasy and just summon it one turn and then dismiss it, and it just blows everybody away with an Inferno attack. And again, the Arcana that they have in the book are all examples. They all have generic names. Arcanum of the Frost, Arcanum of the Gate, Arcanum of the Sword, Arcanum of the Tower. They're not meant to be specific characters that you have to find a way to fit into your story. They're just examples of, well, if there was an Arcanum that manifested as a knight, let's say. You have a Holy Knight Arcanum. Similar to maybe Alexander or Odin from Final Fantasy. Then this is what they might do. But they encourage you to create your own Arcanum. And that's just one class. Again, they have Chimerist, Darkblade, Elementalist, and Entropist, Fury, Guardian, Lore Master. We have to talk about the Guardian. Guardian is just your basic, tank. That's what they are. However, one of the skills you can choose is called Dual Shield Bearer. That's right. You can wield a pair of shields and punch people with them. It's super cool. So, creating a character is really interesting and unique because, again, like most other kind of generic RPG systems, they try to keep their descriptions as generic as possible so that you can flavor them to have the exact kind of character that you want. An example in the high fantasy setting is, well, what if we took the dual shield bearer skill from the Guardian, but instead of them being just two shields, what if they were two massive gauntlets? And so that's what my character uses as their weapon, is these two massive gauntlets that they can block things with, so they kind of work like shields, but they're also these two massive fists that they can punch people with. And that's a completely legitimate way to go about this. Creating characters in this, super, super cool, super interesting and fascinating. Again, something that, like, the Power Rangers RPG didn't do until much, much, much later. And Essence 20 in general didn't do. And neither did, to be perfectly honest, neither does most RPGs. Like, Numenera didn't do it. But this book and this system is designed to be customized by the players and the GMs. And so it gives you... it gives you basically almost all the tools that you need to make most of your own stuff. I think the only thing that it doesn't give you tools to make your own stuff is classes themselves. But everything else, like, you're encouraged to make your own spells. And they may actually have rules for creating your own classes as well. I can't remember them, or I can't remember reading them because my brain doesn't work. But anyway, it's just, the entire thing is just meant to fuel your own creativity, and it does it really well. So, yeah, moving on. All right. The next section, let's talk about monsters. Every game's got to have a bestiary. Every RPG's got to have a bestiary unless you are really not intending to have any combat. And the bestiary in here, again, is more designed, like the monsters that they have in here are examples. Again, they give you everything that you need to build your own monsters. Very akin to, like, Open Legend. Open Legend, technically, I don't think Open Legend has a bestiary. They just tell you how to make them. Same is true for the Cypher System core rulebook. They have example monsters, but they tell you how to build your own monsters right in there. And that's what the bestiary is for this. Something that's kind of interesting about this, because, again, it fits right into the Final Fantasy JRPG style things, is... they have species for the monsters. So you have beasts, constructs, demons, elementals, humanoids, monsters, plants, and undead. And then they have 3 different strength of monsters. You have soldiers, elites, and champions. Soldiers are kind of just your regular monsters. As goblins. If you're playing Final Fantasy 1, you go into the forest, you're going to fight a bunch of goblins. Elites basically are strong enough to act as 2 monsters, and champions are smart enough to act as at least 4 monsters. And the unique thing about champions is you can just keep effectively adding monsters to them to make them more and more powerful to present challenges to your players. So the old JRPG trope of this isn't even my final form, and the idea that monsters, especially high-level bosses, get multiple attacks for every time the players get to attack. It's totally true, and that's what this is designed to do. Yeah, and then the bestiary that they have here has plenty of monsters to be able to run whatever you want. I think the highest level the monsters in here go to is level 20, and the highest level that players can get in the game is level 50. Once you start playing anything above around level 20, you're going to have to start making some of your own creatures because they just don't exist here. But there's enough, there's enough rules and things in here that you can modify these to be higher level creatures. You can reskin them and kind of merge them to create your own creatures. And again, there's enough here that you can just create all of your own creatures from scratch. It's not that complicated. Most creatures are going to have some resistances and vulnerabilities. They have rules for how many hit points they should have at what level and magic points. And then they have lists of skills and things that they can have so they can do more than just, and the creature comes over and bites you. Overall, and the other thing I really like about this, all the creatures have a little kind of portrait art for each of them, and they're adorable. They look like Final Fantasy monsters, like 100%. Whomever the artist was that they got to do all their art in this, it feels so strongly like these are Final Fantasy style characters. And I guess just not entirely, but just that whole kind of JRPG feel. Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, all of those things are kind of mixed into these characters, and they're just adorable. Just amazing. And then eventually, I think, does this one? No, it doesn't look like this one actually has bosses in it. The fantasy one actually has bosses in it. So if you're wondering how to build a boss or something, again, they tell you how to do it in here. But seeing one, that's the one thing I would have liked to see in the core book, is just one example of a boss style character. Because everything in here are all soldiers. So they're all just designed to be singular characters that attack the party in groups. Again, really, really cool, really interesting. One of the character classes, the Chimerist, actually one of their abilities is effectively blue magic, if you're familiar with Final Fantasy. But they learn spells from specific monster types. I believe it's beasts, monsters, and plants. So if they go into combat and a beast, monster, or a plant uses an attack spell, they can learn that spell, and then it becomes one of the spells that they know that they can use whenever. Very similar to how blue magic works in Final Fantasy. So many different versions of it. I think blue mages first showed up in 5, I want to say. Just really cool, awesome stuff. Moving on. Let's talk about equipment and items. So, for, let's see. I think it's in game rules. We didn't talk about inventory points. So inventory points are something that every character has, we should mention. And it's basically if you need kind of a generic item like a potion to heal hit points, or a tonic to be able to remove status effects from your characters, or an elixir to restore your mind points. Most characters have 6 inventory points, and they can use those to basically create any item that, any kind of generic item that they want. And depending on how complex the item, it'll take a varying amount of inventory points. The Tinkerer class actually has a way to use inventory points to do more than that. But it's basically how they deal with everything that's not weapons. All of your items in the game, you don't have to go and buy potions or anything. You just have inventory points. And whenever you get to a place where you could purchase things, you can refill your inventory points by spending 10 zenit, which is their money, for every inventory point you want to recharge. So, talking about equipment and items, that's how, like, again, there isn't like a huge item list of all these different things that you can get. They have the generic items that all characters can use, which are elixir for mind points, remedy for hit points, and tonic to cure status effects. And then you have elemental shards, which just lets you do 10 damage of an element. And then magic tents, which allows you to rest in the wilderness. And that's it as far as named items. Everything else is kind of on, well, do I have a crowbar? That would make sense. We'll say that you have a crowbar. Well, I want to make this particular item. Okay, well, then we're going to say it's going to cost you 2 inventory points. Again, really basic, simple system with a lot of customizability. I say this all the time, the idea that complexity for complexity's sake is not good. Anytime you add a new system that's going to add more complexity, the only reason you should ever do that is if you can't do what you want to do without adding that. And the inventory point system is a wonderful example of that. They wanted to have items that are not weapons or armor. And they didn't want to have to list every single one of them and basically create a kind of permissive list of these are the things that you can create and these are how much they're going to cost. So they create this inventory point system and just go, okay, well, an elixir costs 3 inventory points. So if somebody wants to create something that's kind of similar to that, well, now we have a place to kind of go from and do everything from there. And then equipment, which I have to look at. There we go, equipment. So for equipment, I mentioned before, you have basic weapons and armor, and you have martial weapons and armor. And basically, the difference, the martial stuff tends to be a little bit more powerful, and also tends to be a little bit heavier in general. Like for armor, a lot of times your martial armor is going to give you higher defense, but it's also or it'll give you defense that's not reliant on your dexterity score, but it's also going to give you a lower initiative and things like that. So they have categories of weapons, and those categories are arcane, bow, brawling, dagger, firearm, flail, heavy, spear, sword, and throne. And then you have armors and shields. And that's really about it. And each one of the things like, for example, in the spear category, they have light spears and heavy spears. A light spear is a one-handed melee weapon. You use dexterity and might for your accuracy check. And the damage it does, the way that you calculate a lot of things, is it'll always be the high roll plus a number. So the high roll is basically when you make the roll, whichever die is highest acts as your high roll. So for a light spear, it does a high roll plus 8 physical damage. For the heavy spear, it is a two-handed weapon, still uses dex and might, but the damage is high roll plus 12 physical damage. So, and that's kind of what defines each weapons. So like the difference between a bronze sword and a katana and or a rapier. A bronze sword uses dexterity and might for its attack roll. A katana uses dexterity and insight for its attack roll. The difference between a katana and a rapier, both of them use dexterity and insight for the attack roll, but the katana is two-handed and does an HR plus 10, or high roll plus 10. Rapier does high roll plus 6. So that's how they kind of define all these things. And again, the things that they list in the equipment section in the book are designed to be starting points. When you first build your character, you will have just generic basic weapons. But as you go along, you will find, just like any good RPG, you will find upgraded weapons and magic weapons. And then when you go to the Game Master section, they have an entire section called Designing Rare Items, where it teaches you how to create unique items that are going to be fun for the players to find, or maybe even the players to build. Because again, there are classes that are built around the idea that they create stuff. Again, we talked about that Forge Arcanum being able to create a basic weapon. Well, maybe as you go along, you find a more powerful Arcanum, or that Arcanum gets upgraded in some way as you level up. And now you can create more rare weapons and other things like that. And then after talking about and giving you some really easy to understand rules on how to create rare weapons, they just have a bunch of pages of sample rare weapons in each category. So for sample rare arcane weapons, one of them is a blessed mace, which the accuracy check just uses willpower plus willpower, and it does, when you attack with it, it does your high roll plus 2 damage, but it's light damage instead of physical damage. Or the Necronomicon is an insight plus willpower plus 1 accuracy check. You try to bop someone on the head with it, and it does an HR plus 6 dark damage, or high roll plus 6 dark damage, but when you hit one or more creatures with an offensive spell, each of them suffers shaken when you're wielding this book. So, and that's what they do. Like, again, sample rare bow weapons. They have things like the Yoichi, the Siege Breaker crossbow, the Gatling crossbow. For sample rare brawling weapons, one of my favorites, the Neko! I think it's, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Nekode? Or it might just be Nekode. But Nekode. For anyone that doesn't know, Neko is, I believe it's Japanese for cat or feline or something like that. Anytime they say Neko, they're referring to a cat in some way, shape, or form. And so the Neko, the little 8-bit icon they have is just a cat paw. And it's just a one-handed cat paw melee weapon. That's what it is. But then they also have things like the Hell Fist, or where attacks with this weapon target magic defense instead of regular defense. Or the Spell Sever Dagger. When you hit a creature with this weapon, if the attack had a single target, you may choose a single spell with a duration of scene affecting the target and end its effect on that creature. So the Spell Sever literally stops their buffs and things like that, because spells that have a duration of scene are generally buffs or debuffs and the things like that. Whereas, like, the Assassin's Blade deals 5 extra damage to targets who are in Crisis, which Crisis is their version of, the Bloodied condition from 4th edition. For those of you who don't know what Bloodied is anything when you're below half health. So Crisis is basically anytime you're below half health, you're in Crisis, and it changes how things work. So, each weapon type has their own page of weapons, and they're really cool, and these are all just rare ones. So if you are running a game and you don't want to have to design everything from scratch, you have a ton of stuff to go with. So yeah, that's equipment and items. Moving on. So let's talk about what it's like to be a GM for this. The Game Master section is one of the better sections in RPGs that I've read about, just kind of teaching you how to run an RPG. There's lots of them that exist. Dungeons and Dragons has an entire book about being a GM. And it's not for the faint of heart. It's a great book, don't get me wrong, but Dungeons and Dragons has been around so long. Thank you, phone. Dungeons and Dragons have been around for so long that they kind of expect people already know certain things. And this one in particular doesn't start with the assumption that you already understand the basics of what a GM is and how to GM. And so it has things like, it specifically talks about learn what checks are. They have a page that tells you common checks that people will ask to make, and which attributes to pair up for them. Get familiar with clocks, use clocks constantly, and get familiar with conflicts, which is what their combat is called. And then, yeah, like, I mean, running a Fabula Ultima game, when you first start when you get to the first parts of the book, they have this thing called the 8 pillars. What the 8 pillars are is they're basically kind of themes that will probably show up in your games, because this is what Fabula Ultima is meant to emulate. And these are the topics that Fabula Ultima deals with really, really well. These are not the only things that will ever come up in a Fabula Ultima game, but this is a great place to start. The 8 pillars are ancient ruins and harsh lands, a world in peril, clash in communities, everything has a soul, magic and technology, heroes of many sizes and shapes. It's all about the heroes, and mystery, discovery, and growth. And each one of those pillars has a paragraph under it, just kind of talking about what is this. Like, magic and technology is something that happens constantly in Final Fantasy games. Final Fantasy VI is probably the best example of that particular trope. Magic and technology in Final Fantasy games in general are considered two separate things. You can either be magical or you can be technological. And a lot of times, if people are unable to harness magic, because magic tends to be inborn in some way, shape, or form, it's a part of you. If you don't have that skill, one of the things that comes up often in Final Fantasy games is the idea of, well, I can't use magic, so I'm going to use technology. And they even talk about magitech, which is something that happens in Final Fantasy VI specifically, which is basically where you take kind of the raw form of magic, the energy that allows magic to happen, and you use it to fuel to the technology, which is basically what the Empire in Final Fantasy VI does. They can't use magic. Technically, no one in the world can use magic, since the Espers were shut off in the world of the Espers. Magic basically left the world. And so technology became a thing, and they started learning how to use the ambient magic energy to create magitech, so they could simulate magic with technology. And so if that is an aspect of your world that you want to explore, that is a very Final Fantasy and very Fabula Ultima thing to do. Maybe your players are the first people in a long time that actually have the ability to have the ability to use magic. Or maybe the flip side, maybe they come from a hyper magic world and they're one of the few people that don't have magic. Maybe the party is actually a combination of two groups, where one side comes from a magic using culture and one side comes from a technology using culture. Now they have to blend together, a la Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Stuff like that. The idea of magic and technology being two separate things that tend to be at odds but can also work together works really well. And so by reading over the 8 pillars, that's a really nice thing. And then they talk about different kind of worlds you can have. Your world could be high fantasy, and they talk about stuff that would happen in high fantasy. Your world could be natural fantasy, which is much closer to things like Miyazaki stuff. Princess Mononoke would be a more natural fantasy style setting, or I think is it Lupita? Miyazaki Castle in the Sky is what it's called. Yeah, Castle in the Sky. So Castle in the Sky has kind of themes of the natural fantasy, where the world of nature is kind of fighting against the world of man. And then they talk about techno fantasy, which is going to be much closer to something like Howl's Moving Castle if you're sticking with Miyazaki, or again, the idea. I mean, Final Fantasy in and of itself has kind of had that technical fantasy thing because in the first Final Fantasy game, you go to a space station. Spoiler alert. And there's time travel involved, and then if you go to something like Final Fantasy VII, Midgar is a hyper-technological society that uses Magitech constantly. So, yeah. So they have that in the introduction, and then running this as a game master, the game master section is so great because it actually goes over each one of the character classes and mentions that if your players are using these character classes as part of their character, these are themes that are probably going to be important to their character in some way, shape, or form. For example, the Darkblade. If someone picks the Darkblade as the core concept for their character, the tragedy that awakened their powers should play a major role in the story. Have the player talk about it, then create scenes that bring back echoes of the dark past. Due to their ability to negate dark damage, undead are extremely resilient to the Darkblade Shadow Strike. Keep this in mind when designing battles. And then there might come a time when the Darkblade can finally leave their past behind. When this happens, you might have their skills flipped. Maybe they can now create bonds of affection with Heart of Hope and unleash light damage with Celestial Strike. Discuss this option with players and see if it's something that interests them. So they talk about the class and go, hey, if this is kind of the thing that's holding them together, if you remember when we were going over the kind of example classes, generally there was at least one that would have 3 levels in it. And that would be kind of the core concept of the class. Or maybe they have 2, 2, and 1. Then 2 of them will be kind of the core concepts. And so these character class examples that they give here are really good examples of what you really want to be doing. Look at the characters that you have when you're GMing this and create stories that kind of cater to the class fantasy that's built into those. And then the other thing that's a really big part, I mentioned them before, villains are a massive, massive part of the game. Just like they are in any JRPG. You'll have minor villains and then you will have major villains. A minor villain might only exist for a few hours of storytelling, whereas a major villain is going to be the guy that's kind of pulling the strings of everything. If we think of the original Final Fantasy, minor villains might be the 4 elemental themes, whereas a major villain might be Garland. Or if we go to Final Fantasy IV, again, the elemental fiends are in there too. So those might be minor villains. And then you get to Golbez, would be a major villain. But he's not even the biggest guy, because then eventually you get to Zeromus, who is the supreme villain. He's the real evil. Or if you look at something like Phantasy Star, Dark Falls is your supreme villain, and then you have these little minor villains, things like that. And so a part of running this as a GM is definitely creating interesting villains and using them to fuel this as a story. And again, the fact that you can have scenes that are just the players getting to see what the villain is actually solves one of the problems that can show up in RPGs, which is basically if the characters are not directly interacting with something, a lot of times they will just kind of forget that it exists. A lot of players kind of really only consider the world that they're interacting with to exist, and everything outside of what they're interacting with doesn't really exist to them. So having villain scenes and stuff like that shows that even if they're doing something like they've decided, one of my favorite stories ever was basically this GM creates a scenario for players and he gives them kind of an initial starting mission. And he goes, okay, you've been requested to go to a graveyard located outside of the town, and there's an undead problem there. There's just a bunch of zombies and stuff. They're showing up there. Somebody needs to go deal with it. And the players wanting to really test to see if their GM was a good GM go, we're not going to do that. We're not going to follow your railroad. What we're going to do is we're going to start up our own company. And that's what they did for years. They played this thing and they created this kind of business empire. Well, a couple years down the road, suddenly this lich appears and has this massive army of undeath that goes through and wipes out the town that they're in, and starts wiping out their various businesses and things like that. They go, wait. That's not fair. Like, how could that happen? Well, remember the first adventure that you guys decided you didn't want to go to? Well, just because you didn't go and fight him doesn't mean that he just sat on his ass and did nothing, waiting for you to come kill him. What was causing all the zombies in there was a necromancer there. There was raising the dead. And his goal was to become a lich. You guys never stopped him. So not only did he become a lich, but because nobody ever stopped him, he became an ultra powerful lich with his own army of undeath. Every single other adventurer who were less skilled than you guys went and just became another one of his minions. And now you have an earth-changing event that you have to deal with. And it's one of my favorite stories in the world because I love the fact that the idea, and I tell my players this all the time, just because you're not interacting with this part of the world doesn't mean that it's just stopped functioning. The world keeps going on even if you guys aren't a part of it. And your inaction is just as important as your action. So by having villain scenes, you can actually deal with that a lot easier because the players are going off and doing their own thing, which is totally fine. They'll get reminded that, by the way, this stuff is still going on. And if you don't want to deal with it now, it's perfectly fine. But eventually you will have to deal with it because the bad guys over here are going to get worse. And you're going to have to deal with them eventually. It's your decision as to when you deal with them. But in addition to how to make villains also have something else that's really unique. They have these things called Ultima points, which is basically villain versions of Fabula points that they can use to do cool stuff. But they also can do this thing called escalation. Escalation is basically you defeat the villain, and the villain can either die, and yay, you win, you can go on to the next mini adventure, or they can escalate. There's 3 levels of villains. You have minor villains, major villains, supreme villains, and each one gets a little bit more powerful. So akin to how Kefka starts off as a kind of whiny jester person and eventually becomes a demigod, the idea of this isn't even my final form is 100% a thing. You can take a minor villain, and when they're defeated, you can have them escalate and become a major villain. And that allows them to get more hit points. It might involve them fleeing for a little bit to give the party some time to deal with the fact that, whoa, this guy just got a lot more powerful. Gives them a refresh to all their Ultima points, and makes them significantly more powerful. And then if they defeat the major villain, they can, this isn't even my final form, they can escalate to a supreme villain. So very much akin to how in Final Fantasies in general, when you're fighting the last boss, you know that once you destroy his hit points, he's coming back as something more powerful instantly. That's the escalation mechanic. And that's another really big thing for GMing, is understanding having minor villains that never escalate is an important thing that happens in every single JRPG ever. You will have people that are important, and it happens in RPGs in general as well. You will have villains that are important and influential in a small part of the world, but outside of that, they're not. And once you take care of them, hooray, you've fixed that little part of the world. And then you're going to have more difficult things. If you think about Critical Role's first campaign, they started off, as far as the ones that we got to watch, They started off relatively simplistic. They were going into um, they were going into their version of the Underdark, effectively, to rescue an ally from a mind flayer colony, effectively. Well, then, that's a minor villain. It's dangerous for them right then, but it's something that they dealt with and they got out of. Then they have the Briarwood arc. Well, those are much more difficult because they took over the entire town. They were doing some pretty scary stuff. And then they kill them, but one of the Briarwoods escalates and goes from a minor villain to a major villain as she starts dealing with some Vecna style stuff. And then the Chroma Conclave comes in, and those are definitely major villains. You kill them all off. Well, then we find out that the Briarwoods had some other stuff, and now you have to deal with actual Vecna, which is your supreme villain. So it's a very, very common idea that you will have minor villains and then major villains and these supreme villains showing up. And they just kind of quantified here. It's a really important part of GMing. Because again, every time a villain shows up, the players get Fabula points. So whether it's the villain interacting with the player a la Strahd, if you've ever played Curse of Strahd, they encourage you to have Strahd just randomly show up and just mess with their shit a little bit. And he's such a powerful character that the first time he shows up, it's kind of encouraged to allow him to kind of goad the players into attacking him, because the players in no way, shape, or form can do anything to Strahd. He's far too powerful for level 3 characters. But he shows up and they try and do anything, and he just kind of, I don't really care about you. You are pathetically weak. There's no reason for me to even care. And then he wanders off. Having villains show up and interact with the party regularly is something that's encouraged in Fabula Ultima. And even when they're not interacting with the party directly, they're showing up in other ways. You have your villain scenes. You have other things. You might have multiple villains that show up. So, really important part of GMing in general for Fabula Ultima. And then, obviously, creating artifacts and all that stuff. All of that stuff is part of GMing as well, or creating rare items. They also have these things called artifacts, which are items that are so important and so powerful that an entire campaign would fluctuate around them. Something like maybe an Excalibur type thing, or the stuff that they have here. One of the examples of an artifact is called Dead Man's Zenith. So a dead man's coin. It resembles an ancient gold coin, save for the skull on its back. Easily lost or misplaced, this unassuming gold coin appears worn by age. Many who see the shining skull on its flip side would laugh it out as a coinsman's prank, or coinsmith's prank. But old sailors would urge them to let the thing sink to the bottom of the ocean. An old legend tells of an indestructible gold coin whose bearer may command an army of ghostly pirates in exchange for their own soul. So you have things like artifacts that you can plan an entire campaign around of, well, the Dead Man's Zenith has shown up again, kind of like the One Ring. And whoever controls it, like if the bad guy gets control of the Dead Man's Zenith, well, he has to give up his soul, but he's a bad guy. He doesn't really care about it. And then he gets an army of ghostly pirates. That's not something that you want. And maybe the culmination of it is very much Pirates of the Caribbean style thing, where in order to keep the bad thing out of the bad guy's hands, a good guy does something bad by sacrificing their soul and taking command themselves. And they basically trap the ghostly army somewhere far away and becomes the jailer of the dead, to take a phrase from another well-known RPG series. Things like that, all fun stuff for GMs. So, moving on. Let's talk about some additional resources. As I mentioned before, there is already a supplement that's come out for this. It's called the Atlas of High Fantasy. And it has a lot of cool stuff in it. They have a new system for custom weapons, which are, instead of just like a really cool glove that lets you punch people in the soul, this allows you to create very unique weapons, combination weapons, things like that. They have a couple they have 4 new characters that you can kind of mix and match for stuff. And then they also add this thing called quirks, which basically just gives your player at character creation something really unique, like this character can fly, or this character has a curse on them, or something like that. And then they also have zero powers, which are limit breaks. If you're familiar with Final Fantasy, it's a limit break. So really cool, interesting thing. I really, really like it. Like I said, the Techno Atlas of Techno Fantasy is supposedly coming out this month in Italian, and we'll probably get it sometime early next year in English. And then they've already mentioned that they're going to do a natural fantasy as well. In addition to that, the Fabula Ultima website, which again I'll have linked, the website to get everything, they have just extra stuff. They have, I believe, 2 classes. They have a necromancer and the card something. What's it called again? The Ace of Cards. The Ace of Cards was a April Fool's joke, and the necromancer is not. Neither the Ace of Cards or necromancer are particularly well balanced. They were just meant to be extra stuff that you could look at. And then they have a couple other cool stuff that exists there. The Ace of Cards and Necromancer and all that stuff. That stuff is free. The Atlas of High Fantasy you can buy from DM's Guild or a bunch of other places. I think Modifius actually sells the hardcover books for them. So yeah. As far as additional resources, that's really it. There is a Fabula Ultima Reddit that I've played around in a little bit, but I haven't found a whole lot of resources there. And then there's also, the creator has his own Discord server that one of the channels is Fabula Ultima. I've not checked it out, so I won't be linking to either of those. But if you look online, it's not that difficult to find them. But for the most part, again, because the game is only a little over a year old in English, there's not a lot of additional resources yet. But they're constantly putting out new things. And again, with the community that I've been finding with it, I would be shocked if we don't start seeing a lot more more support and things like that for this, and a lot more fan created stuff showing up, like fan bestiaries and stuff like that. So yeah, otherwise, moving on. Now it's time for final thoughts. So overall, I love Fabula Ultima. It's the reason that I am running my mini campaign this year is going to be for Fabula Ultima, is because it has intrigued me since I purchased it. I got it shortly after Gen Con because I heard it won an Emmy, and I'm like, oh, this looks really, really cool. And I'm such a huge Final Fantasy fan. I definitely wanted to do this. And the more I learned about the books and everything, the more I couldn't wait to find a way to play this. It's a phenomenal game. I love the ability to kind of mix and match classes to create your own unique characters. I forgot to mention in the review, the maximum level you can have in any class is 10, and that means you've mastered the class. You get a special, effectively a feat when you do that, and then you can add another class. You can never have any more than 3 non-mastered classes when you're leveling up, but obviously getting to level 50, that means bare minimum you're going to have to master at least probably at least 2 or 3 classes before you get to the top. And then the more levels you get, the more different things you kind of mix and match in there. You create these really unique, interesting, fun to play characters. Combat doesn't involve minis or anything like that. It's played just like a JRPG. You have the bad guys on one side, the good guys on the other side, and they each get an action to do something. There's no distance involved. There's no distance on spells or anything. The only thing that affects things is there are flying creatures, and flying creatures can't be hit by melee weapons unless you have specific skills. So it boils everything down to, again, play like an old school JRPG. And I love that. I grew up on JRPGs when I was a kid, and I've never grown out of them. RPGs are my favorite genre of video game. I play them constantly. I love turn-based RPGs. I especially love turn-based RPGs where you get to build your own party, like I think it's the Eternia series, which started out on the DS, and now they have the first 3 games on the Switch, which are super fun. But you get to make your own characters, and it's turn-based, and you explore dungeons. Or like Baldur's Gate just came out, turn-based RPGs and stuff like that. Those are the things that I grew up on, and I love them. I replay Final Fantasy V all the time because everything about that game is amazing. When the Pixel remasters came out, I've beaten Final Fantasy 1 and 2. I haven't done 3 because it takes forever, or 4, and I'm working on like my 12th time beating Final Fantasy V. So yeah, I love all this stuff. The amount of love that went into this game, the amount of effort that they put into the game is mind-boggling. There are just so many interesting, fun things that you can do with this system. And it scratches an itch that I've been having really ever since branching out from just Dungeons and Dragons. Once I started looking at new games and playing new games, I've become really, really big fans. And this actually happened way back in 4th edition when I played 4th edition. I'm really a big fan of games that give you the ability to kind of flavor things. And I think that was one of the things that D&D 4th edition did really, really well, is your abilities had names and everything like that, but it was really easy to kind of flavor them to be whatever you wanted. One of the guys I used to play with, he played a hybrid class. It was a druid shaman hybrid in 4th edition. And his thing was he liked bears. And so any ability that he had would be bear themed. So one of the things that shamans could do is they could have this kind of spiritual pet thing. And the way that you got your pet onto the field is you had a power that would allow you to basically shoot a cold bolt at an enemy. It would do damage, and then your familiar would just kind of pop down next to them. And then a lot of your abilities as a shaman would be affected by where your familiar was standing. So he flavored it as, well, I have a bear cannon. It's a bear cannon. So what it is I conjure a giant cannon, and I have a bear, and he puts on a little like bullet hat, and then I shove him into the cannon, and then I shoot him at the enemy, and then he hits the enemy, and then he plops down next to them. At one point, I think, due to a combination of druid abilities, being able to summon creatures, and druids getting an animal companion, and shamans getting an animal companion, he could have 7 bears active at one time, all doing different shit, because that was the nonsense of 4th edition. And so Fabula Ultima, because it's designed to be reskinned, and it's designed to be something that you just use to tell the stories that you want to tell, makes it just amazing to me. I absolutely love everything about it. I love the really, really in-depth character creation that is still relatively simple, but has enough complexity to create really interesting characters. I love the villain system. I love the Fabula point system. Everything about it is just awesome and amazing, and I think it's great. I love the inventory point system. That simplifies inventory management massively. So yeah, anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. In the comments down below, what is your favorite JRPG character or character class? Do you like Dark Knights? Do you like Monk? Are you a Monk main like me? Do you like some of the weird stuff, like the Spell Fencers from the Final Fantasy Tactics Advance series? Or maybe you're a big fan of Dragoons. Whatever it is, let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today. I will see you you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.